Hello and welcome to Women's Public Leadership Network, first episode of our first ever podcast series, Tips from the Trail, where we explore the path to political leadership from the decision to run to Election Day. This program features women leaders in and out of politics who have run campaigns and have also been candidates themselves, and they will share the best tips and tricks for success. Formerly a Facebook Live series, we're excited to launch this program on new platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. I am your host, Larissa Martinez, and I'm the founder and president of Women's Public Leadership Network. We are a national nonprofit that is seeking to get more women into public office at all levels across the U.S. Joining us today is WPLN National Co-Chair, former U.S. Representative Mimi Walters from California. Mimi, it's so great to have you with us. Thank you so much. Mimi, as you know, this is the first episode of this new podcast, and we're so excited to have you join us. So thank you so much. You are the epitome of the type of leader that we need right now. And so I'd love for you to take a moment and share your leadership journey with our listeners.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I'm so honored to be your first guest. This is very exciting. When I first decided to get involved in running for office, it really stems back from when I was in high school. I had gone to a new school and I didn't know anybody, and I got involved in student government as a way to meet people. And it was really through, my time in learning how government worked through my participation at the student government level that I thought, you know what, someday I think I'd like to run for office. And I ended up going to UCLA, got very involved in student government at UCLA, and interned on Capitol Hill for a former member of Congress, Bill Thomas, who was from Bakersfield. And I knew at that point that I'd love to go back to Washington, D.C. someday, but I had to graduate from college. I had to get a job and make a living. I wanted to get married. I wanted to start my family. And as I sort of checked those boxes, my husband and I had moved back to the town I grew up in. And after my first child was born, I started getting involved in my local city. I walked into City Hall one day and said, I want to get involved in the community. How can I volunteer? And the community liaison person said to me, well, we need to have somebody help us with our holiday parade. Would you do that? And I said, absolutely. And I started my career off as crowd control for the holiday parade in Laguna Niguel.
I was going to say I feel like that is the first of many parades for you, because that gave you an experience behind the scenes, because as we will hear, you got to be in a lot of parades throughout your career. Just out of curiosity, what was kind of the aha moment or the issue or the kind of impetus to make you think, I even want to volunteer, I even want to get involved? Was it something that has just been inherent in the way that you approach your life in terms of public service? Was there something specific that just kind of got you into the space?
I think when I moved back to my city, I had lived away for several years, that I wanted to feel part of my community. And my dad had done some stuff at the local level just as a volunteer. And I thought, what better way for me to really embrace my community? I'm raising my family here. I want to feel like I have a family within the city. And that was really why I decided to get involved.
I feel like a lot of women, especially when they're looking at getting involved, there is a lot of question around how to balance. There could be some fears in terms of putting themselves out there in some capacity. Did you have any of those fears, or has it just been something that you just kind of jump in and see what happens?
Well, I just decided to get involved. But one of my biggest fears, honestly, when I decided to run for office, was having to get up and talk in front of people. And I know that's a fear that a lot of people have, because you don't want to make a fool of yourself. And I didn't have any sort of public speaking experience. And I think that was probably my biggest fear. And then eventually I overcame it. But I think that's one of the reasons that, people don't do this, because they're afraid to get up and be in front of people and take criticism and make a fool of themselves. But I overcame it eventually. And now I don't care if I make a fool of myself.
No, I think you just do them very rarely, rarely. So were there any resources or training that you had, or is it just practice over time?
When I first got involved in the city in Laguna Niguel, I got to meet a lot of the city council members, and I started to get involved in my local Republican Party because I'm a Republican and conservative. And I ended up working on several campaigns. I also, through my network, just in the city and in the local Laguna Niguel Republican Women Federated, I was involved in starting another political organization with several women called the California Women's Leadership Association.
Mhm.
And it was my relationships that I had developed with some of those women who had been in politics prior to me, and they were older than I, that I learned from them really. But I think I got most of my experience when I volunteered on other people's campaigns. That's how I learned how to run my own campaign.
So when you were involved in these other organizations and you met these other women leader, did any of them recruit you for any of these positions or say, hey, you should think about this and kind of take you under their wing from a mentorship capacity?
That didn't that didn't really happen with me. I had women that I would reach out to who were in office. There was one woman in particular named Marion Bergeson, and she was the first woman who served in both the state assembly and the state senate in California as a Republican. And then she ended up being Secretary of Education under Pete Wilson, who was our governor at the time. And she really was sort of all of ours, younger women's person that we looked up to, and she would spend a lot of time with us and talk to us about if we wanted to run for office. And she's was kind of an icon to many of us, and she paved the way for us.
So flipping kind of gears a little bit, what would you say for those that are looking to run for office? So as you noted, you had a few folks that were a few leaders that you really looked up to or that you could at least emulate in some capacity, folks to see, how they did it, different challenges, all these kind of pieces.
Mm-hmm.
For a woman that's just interested in getting more involved in her community or seeking to run for office, what do you think are some of those first steps that they need to do in order to start to feel comfortable with that leap?
I think you have to first of all be very passionate about wanting to be involved, and if you don't have the passion, I wouldn't suggest doing it because it can be very difficult. It can be very invasive on your family life. I was very fortunate to have a husband who was extremely supportive of me. And when we were raising our children, because I had 4 kids in less than 5 years. And so I had a great partner that helped me when it came to our family life. And I think that that's something that a woman needs to say, am I in a position to be able to take this on? I also recommend to young women that have a career, because if you need to make a living and you need something to fall back on, and if you're in office for a few years and then suddenly, like me, I lost my race, in 2018, and then I said to myself, what am I going to do? Right? I'd been in office for over 20 years, and now I had to rebuild and figure out what that next step was. And I didn't have a career, so to speak, really to fall back on. So that is something that I think people need to take under consideration. I also would suggest to women who think that they want to get involved and have faith and do it, but have a sense of humor and don't take everything so seriously. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. We all make them. And when you run for office, people are going to elect you from your views. And where there might be a time that you decide that you're going to change what you believe in, or you've morphed into a different way of thinking, which is okay because we all do. But be careful how you approach that, and don't be somebody who is just going to tell people what they want to hear. Have conviction for what you believe in. And when it comes time to making those tough decisions, fall back on your convictions and why people elected you.
Yeah. I think the principle piece is so important, and it's hard. I think it's one of the hardest parts about serving is maintaining those principles, because you do have a number of factors, especially the higher up you go in position, that are weighing on you, that are coming at you from your own personal side, professional side, the constituent side. I mean, there's so many different spaces that if you are not really clear on your why, I think it's really hard to maintain that consistency of principle throughout your journey. So I really applaud you for being able to do that, especially during some really tough elections and races. And to that point, what are some challenges that you specifically faced, and how would you help women today look to at least try and mitigate some of them when they're jumping in?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think women who decide that they want to run need to understand something very clearly. It costs money to run for office. And you have to be willing to ask people for money. You have to be willing to get on that phone and make the phone calls to the donors and convince them why they need to support you. So many people think about running for office and they don't think that they have to raise the money, or it's not something that enters their mind. And you have to have a thick skin, and you have to say, okay, if people say no to me, I've just got to go on to the next person, and you can't take it personally. The other thing I think that's been kind of difficult for me, and this was just really since social media came on board in the last several years. When I first got into office, we didn't have social media. But now people have cameras on their phones, and everywhere you go, your opposition, follows you and watches your every move. And so there's not a lot of privacy left for public officials. And you have to get very comfortable with the fact that that invasion of privacy is going to happen. Um, and you have to be okay with it, and you have to be careful. And you have to, wanting to protect your family, all of that plays into it. But social media has really changed the way people interact today, and it's changed politics, and it's changed being an elected official.
Yeah, I think that goes back again to having the principles, right? It's easier to continue to build that relationship with your constituents and with the public if they know where you stand and knew that going in. So I think that's interesting when you talk about that. I feel like politics today, it is really tough. A lot of folks are saying that, they don't necessarily want to jump in. They don't necessarily want to get involved in this. They kind of want to step back. Can you talk about why you think it is so important for especially women to take a step forward and to have their voices represented in the space?
I look at women as being consensus builders. Think about, many women have families, right? And I remember spending so much time with my kids, trying to break up the fights and trying to have everybody get along and trying to have the kids negotiate with each other, and everybody has to give a little bit. And I think naturally that's what we bring to the table, is bringing different sides to get together and being able to come to a consensus, because the best governing is in the middle, not extreme right, not extreme left, but when both sides can come together, because nobody's ever going to get everything they want. And that's where I believe you get your best policy. I think it's incredibly important, especially for women today, to be involved in the process so that they set the example and they show the next generation that they can do it too, that they can have a seat at the table. When I first ran for office back in the mid 90s, and I mentioned to you, I had 4 kids under the age of 5 at that point. And even some of the women that I had spoken with and gotten to know didn't think I should run, because they felt like I should stay home and take care of my kids because I was the mother of these small kids. Today, you see women have careers more so than back in the mid 90s, even though it doesn't seem like that long ago. But women today have careers, and women today have a lot more opportunity. And I think it's wonderful. I don't think you see the same sort of hurdles, if you will, that I faced in the mid 90s. And I think it's sort of incumbent upon us to get ready for that next generation and give them the women the confidence that they can run too.
Yeah, and as you know, here at WPLN, we really care a lot about diversifying the lenses and the voices and the backgrounds that are at tables. So, to your point, women do bring a different perspective. It does not mean that all women are the same or that they have the same approach, but just trying to bring in more of these policymakers and people that are looking to solve problems. Which is why, again, we appreciate that you're part of this and you're our national co-chair because you epitomize that, and we appreciate your service. And so, looking at service, I think it's something that too, we talk a lot about the challenges and how to overcome and all the different skills you need to have and how to build up confidence. But there's also a lot of amazing rewards to public service. Can you tell us about some of the most rewarding experiences you've had or things that keep you involved, because you're even involved today in public service?
The most rewarding thing for me, I think, as a public official, was helping to solve problems for people and solving the problems for my constituents, because I know how frustrating it is if you have an issue with the federal government, for example, and you don't know what to do, and you're call the agency and you're on hold for hours, or they won't even take your call and say they have to call you back or whatever. It's super frustrating. And I remember my office specifically was very good at helping constituents solve their problems, because there's nothing more satisfying that knowing that you help somebody. And I am still very involved today because I obviously care very much about this country and about the future. And I now have an opportunity, because I'm not in Congress any longer or in any other elected office. I have more time on my hands to actually zero in on specific issues to try to make a difference.
Do you have an example of a time that you got the opportunity to really use all of your different skills to move a problem or an issue forward, especially when you're in Congress?
There was one piece of legislation, I think, in particular, that I'm very proud of. And now, understanding it's not easy to get legislation passed. People think, oh, what have you ever done in Congress, right? Well, listen, you got 435 members in the House and 100 senators, and to get a piece of legislation to the president's desk is oftentimes very difficult. But I felt very self gratification, if you will, when a young woman came to my office and had told me that she had been sexually assaulted when she was in college, and she every time she had to have her sexual assault kit not disposed of, she had to ask for it every 6 months to keep it alive while she went through this process of trying to prosecute the person who had sexually assaulted her. And so we were fortunate. I was a bipartisan piece of legislation that I did with Zoe Lofgren, who I was currently on the Judiciary Committee at the time, and we able to pass that piece of legislation to help survivors of sexual assault with more protections. And it was actually unanimous out of both the House and the Senate, and President Obama signed it into law. And that was a common sense piece of legislation that was helping many people.
Yeah, for sure. That's amazing, especially during that time to be able to
Yeah.
do that, and something so high profile. I would imagine too. It's a big
Hmm.
issue. So I appreciate you taking that on. Just as a wrap up, what advice would you give women that are looking to take this next step? What's your kind of final piece of advice? I know we've talked a lot about what you've learned and what people should consider and all these different pieces. But if you could give one person, one woman listener out there, a piece of advice on jumping in, what would it be?
Yeah. I've always tried to live my life as trying to make a mark somewhere and trying to leave this country a better place than what I was born into. And I've always sort of thought, if I don't do it, who is going to do it? We've all been given by the grace of God one life, and we have to make the most of it. And I really firmly believe, if you're somebody who cares about the future of our country and leaving this place a better place for future generations, then you need to get involved. And you almost have to get involved, because if you don't do it, who else is going to do it?
Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us, sharing your insights. I know that you have a lot going on right now, so we appreciate you taking a few moments to share with our listeners your journey and experience and also why you think they should be involved. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for joining us for our first episode of our new podcast series, Tips from the Trail. We are excited to continue this series next month, so be sure to sign up and to turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. This year in particular, we are excited for our 4th annual National Summit in Orlando, Florida, June 5th through 7th. And as a thank you to our listeners, we are offering 10% off our general admission registration through February 5th using the code PODCAST. If you're interested in more information or would like to sponsor, please contact our team. And you can find us on social media channels at the link below. We hope that you'll tune in next month. Happy trails.